Is our live stream working today? Yeah, great. Just started, great. You know, I watched this on live stream last week. Didn't follow the rules though. You know that thing about standing, sitting, or kneeling at the proper time? Horizontal through the whole mass. Horizontal. So, well, it was once upon a time at the great city of Babylon where God came down and mixed up our languages at the Tower of Babel. Yeah, he came down and he asked, what's this big construction project going on here? Oh, we're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to build a tower all the way to heaven. And he said, well, we'll see about that. So he mixed up our languages, and that's the story of why we speak French and German and English and Swahili and everything else. But that began a series of problems that each culture would have to contend with and how they would communicate with each other. I can only speak for us in the English language, but let me give some examples. First off, there are multiple meanings for words. Take, for instance, at Christmas, I talked about the one-word myth. Only recently I found out that the definition can be a little bit wider than I always anticipated, so we spoke about that. How about the word homely? If I were to call one of you homely, I might risk getting smacked in the face. Over in England, it's more of a complimentary term, so we have that issue. How about the word love? Now, there's a real tough one. I love pizza. I love my cats. I love my car. I love well, I don't have a spouse, but speaking for yourself, I love my spouse and my children. I love my flock. And yet there's another type of love. We'll call it the greatest love ever, called agape love. Greater love hath no man, that he should lay down his life for his friends. How about figures of speech? Now, there's another matter. There's many, many different types of figures of speech. Now, this causes problems for many people, particularly those who come into the United States maybe for the first time from another place. How about, this is my classic, I got this in front of one of my school students, it's raining cats and dogs. I'm waiting for my first cat and dog to fall out of the sky, you know. We all know what that means, but for somebody else, no. Our word for today is Epiphany. It too has a couple of meanings, a secular meaning and a few spiritual biblical meanings as well. Sometimes get used by us moderns as it's a moment of revelation. The scales fall from our eyes. In a sense, that might be a figure of speech too, you know. It wasn't the first time, it was a real thing. The scales fall from Paul's eyes, but ever since then, it's a different thing. It's now like an aha moment that we have, a special revelation, an insight. And we're inclined to say, aha, I just had an epiphany. But the true and original meaning goes back to this feast day, what we celebrate today, the visit of the Magi to the new king of Israel. And so more specifically, Epiphany means a manifestation to the Gentiles, that's us, and an indication that the one supreme God is now a God for all peoples. Now, at Christmas, I mentioned that I typically like to try to find a new angle to address whenever I speak about these things. I mean, we're all familiar with the Christmas story and its many aspects, but in the past, we talked about the Magi. I think before this Mass is over, we're going to be saying, we three kings of Orient are. Well, they weren't necessarily three, and they weren't necessarily kings. They were Magi, wise men. We say three only because of the three gifts. There could have been four, two, one, whatever the case. But in any case. And of course, they followed a mysterious star. That's a topic all by itself, and we've addressed that in years gone past too. Some years back, we had a gentleman come to town, Rick Larson, a lawyer who was an amateur astronomer. And he had some thoughts on the matter, and he put together a great presentation called Bethlehem Star. Very interesting. You can watch this on YouTube, and I'm sure we have it in our lending library as well. But we still speculate on the nature of that mysterious celestial event called the Star of Bethlehem. But star, that's another word that could have several meanings. Ask a person on the street what a star is, you might get several different answers. Needless to say, we're all familiar with the little white specks in the nighttime sky. You may be able to say a few intelligent things about them. They're light years away. Our own sun is a star. Well, you might get some other answers too. The first response was, well, how about that rock star so-and-so, or that movie star? Person could also talk about a celebrity of some sort. Well, star is a word that I'd like to talk about today. That's my word for the day. The greatest star of all, Jesus. And I wouldn't reduce Jesus to mere celebrity. He's beyond all that. I'm talking about God as a star, and I mean that literally. I'll explain that more in a few moments from now. Yeah, I had a lot of extra time on my hands last week, and so I spent much of it YouTubing. One of my favorite religious topics these days is archaeology. It's kind of a detective story in which we examine evidence that's now thousands of years old, and we go back and try to make some sense out of it as we compare the significant Bible passages with some of the archaeology that's been found and discovered. Now, last week I got acquainted with a new personality, archaeologist Joel Kramer. He's kind of an Indiana Jones, but from Utah. Utah Jones. Much of the same history, minus the hat, the whip, and the gun. He's from Utah, grew up in the Middle East. The Middle East. His father was an oil company executive, and on their family vacations, they would drive out into the Holy Land archaeological sites, way out in the wilderness, the deserts. And this fueled his interest in archaeology. After getting his degree at Arizona State, he moved back to the Middle East and lived in Jerusalem and Jordan for several years. And I would say he's done much to popularize biblical archaeology. Now, he and his son would go out in the desert these days, and with their drones, they would fly over the archaeological sites. Now, the son goes back to his computer and does some computer graphics, which makes for a very, very interesting presentation. And the official title is called The Expedition Bible, Evidence, Context, and Experience. And he wrote a book that preceded all this, his experience and his findings. He used the name that I used in my very first line of my homily, Where God Came Down. Where God Came Down. That first line, he came down to the Tower of Babel. So God has indeed come down many times over the years, and in a sense, he leaves, in many cases, evidence of his visit. The written word, of course, the Bible, but in some cases also archaeology, the Tower of Babel being an example. Professor Kramer takes us to the various sites. He took us to Babylon and shows us what remains of the famous tower. Not much, a footprint, but he says some things, interesting things that would persuade us. City of Jericho, too, where the walls came tumbling down. The place where God wrestled with Jacob. Professor Kramer and his son wrestled on the side of a mountain and caught it by way of the drone. Wrestling on the side of a mountain. And we enjoy part of that legacy here at our parish here with that sign out in our hallway, a quote from Jacob. After his wrestling match, he says, "How awesome is this place? This is nothing less than the house of God and the gate of heaven." And how about the Trinity, which appeared to have come down and visited with Abraham and Sarah in the desert? And there at the back of the church, we have this icon, Russian icon, depicting that encounter. But as for today and that unique understanding of the word star, here's the setting. So listen up. This is important. Use your imagination. 3,400 years ago, imagine being on the top of Mount Nebo at the end of the 40-year sojourn in the desert. You're standing next to Moses. This is as far as he would be able to go. He looked out to the distant west over Canaan, the land that was promised to Abraham so many years ago. But then Moses died there on Mount Nebo and was buried somewhere on that mountain. But there's also somebody else who looked down on that Israeli camp, a pagan mystic, a seer. There's a lot of people down there. That's the Israeli camp. It's the promised land they've been journeying to, the land flowing with milk and honey. They have been promised this as their homeland. This pagan man was called Balaam, son of Beor. This person is quite obscure, but he makes an important prophecy. It's called the star prophecy. We read about it in the book of Numbers, chapter 24. But interesting, it's not playing a part in any of the readings for the Epiphany in our church. It might be somewhere else during the church year, but not here today. This is what Balaam said. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. That's it. Very short, very sweet, very concise. And you got to wonder whether or not this was the passage that influenced those magi to pack their bags and head for Bethlehem. Throughout the Middle East, stars are depicted in many ways in the archaeological finds. Stars are indications of deity, gods. Once ancient kings used to be shown carrying scepters in one hand, but pointing to a star in his other. His own personal star, his God. But the Jews are a monotheistic religion, only one God. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Behold, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And so this prophet describes him as a star. That star is God, and he's carrying a scepter. So then in the fullness of time, a God, a king, is coming into the world, and God will visit his people. And so on this day, as our Christian season winds down, we celebrate the Epiphany, the guidance of the star, the coming of the Magi, where God came down through the manifestation of the little child laying in the manger, and our recognizing of him as the one true God and King.